The hall was designed to make you feel small. Not metaphorically. Not symbolically. Physically. The ceiling stretched so high that clouds formed near its upper reaches, slow-moving, artificial weather drifting between columns the size of skyscrapers. The air itself was tuned. Temperature, humidity, even the faint hum beneath silence, every variable calibrated to create one specific psychological effect. Submission. Visitors entered, looked up, and understood. You are not in control here. The floor reflected everything like black glass, flawless and endless. Every step echoed just slightly too long, just enough to remind you that you were being observed. Studied. Measured. Judged. For 400 years, the Galactic Assembly had perfected this room. They had learned exactly how much pressure it took to bend a species without breaking it. And almost every species bent. Ambassador Ilara Venn did not look at the ceiling. She stepped through the entrance, her boots clicking softly against the polished stone, and kept her eyes level. Forward. Always forward. It was a small thing. But in a room like this, small things mattered. Because small things were noticed. Across the chamber, seated at a long, curved table that seemed to stretch into the horizon, the representatives of 12 dominant species watched her. Some leaned forward. Some remained perfectly still. One adjusted its posture, a subtle movement of multiple limbs settling into what its kind considered a neutral stance. They had expected hesitation. A glance upward. A moment of awe. They did not get it. Ilara walked to her seat and sat down without asking permission. That was the second thing. Silence followed. Not empty silence, calculated silence. The kind used to let discomfort grow roots. Most envoys filled that silence. They shifted. They spoke. They apologized for nothing. Ilara rested her hands on the table and waited. She had spent 18 years in rooms like this. Different worlds. Different species. Same strategy. Pressure. Delay. Psychological framing. Make the other side feel smaller before the negotiation even begins. She had learned something important during those years. The pressure only worked if you accepted it. At the far end of the table, Speaker Kael'thur unfolded himself. He was tall, even-seated, long-limbed, layered in pale, reflective skin that caught the chamber light and scattered it like glass. His species valued symmetry, and his posture was perfectly balanced, every movement deliberate. He had been preparing for this meeting for months. It showed. Ambassador Venn, he said, his voice carried through the chamber by a translation system designed to sound authoritative in every known language. The Assembly welcomes humanity. There was a pause. Another calculated one. The Assembly, he continued, recognizes your species' accelerated development. A compliment, carefully dulled. Ilara inclined her head slightly. Noted. One word. Nothing more. A flicker, barely visible, passed through the representatives. That was the third thing. Most species filled space with gratitude when acknowledged by the Assembly. Ilara did not. Kael'thur continued anyway, though something in the rhythm of the room had shifted, just slightly. Over the past decade, he said, human expansion has demonstrated persistence. Not strength. Not innovation. Persistence. Another deliberate choice. You have entered regions of space long considered, strategically delicate. You have established relations with independent civilizations outside Assembly guidance. You have altered certain equilibria. There it was. The real message beneath the ceremony. You are interfering. Ilara leaned back slightly in her chair. Not defensively. Comfortably. As if she belonged there. Equilibria change, she said. Her tone was calm. Even. Not confrontational. Not apologetic. Just. Factual. Another ripple through the chamber. Small. But real. For the first time since she had entered, one of the delegates looked, not at her, but at another member of the Assembly. A glance. Quick. Meaningful. Ilara saw it. She saw all of it. And she understood something in that moment that confirmed what she had suspected before she ever stepped into this hall. This meeting wasn't about diplomacy. It wasn't about cooperation. And it definitely wasn't about opportunity. It was about control. And more importantly, it was about removing something that refused to be controlled. Kael'thir folded his upper limbs together. Which, he said smoothly, is why the Assembly has decided to offer humanity a gesture of trust. There it was. The word. Offer. Gesture. Trust. Every dangerous proposal in the history of the Assembly had begun with those three ideas. Ilara didn't react. Not outwardly. But internally, something settled into place. A quiet certainty. They weren't here to test humanity. They were here to end a problem. And they believed they had found a clean way to do it. Humanity, Kael'thir said, is to be granted full colonial sovereignty over a newly designated world. The room stilled. Even the air seemed to pause. Ilara didn't speak. She didn't move. Because this was the moment. The moment where most species leaned forward. Where curiosity overcame caution. Where the trap closed without resistance. She simply looked at him. Waiting. Kael'thir held her gaze. And for just a fraction of a second, something behind his composure tightened. Designation. Virex 9. He let the name settle. Then added, with precise clarity, a Class 15 world. Silence. Real silence this time. Because everyone in that room understood exactly what that meant. Not a challenge. Not a frontier. A death sentence. And for the first time since entering the chamber, Ilara Ven smiled. Not widely. Not warmly. But enough. Noted, she said. The word Class 15 did not need explanation. Every species in the assembly chamber understood it the same way. It was not a classification for worlds meant to be lived on. It was a classification for worlds that ended things. Kael'thir allowed the silence to stretch, not accidentally, but with precision. He knew exactly how long it took for that designation to settle into the mind of a listener. Long enough to imagine. Long enough to calculate. Long enough to hesitate. Most species, when presented with a Class 15 world, asked questions immediately. Clarifications. Conditions. Escape clauses. Ilara Ven did none of those things. She sat still. Watching. Kael'thir continued. Virex 9, he said, exists at the outer boundary of habitable classification parameters. A gentle way of saying, it shouldn't be habitable at all. A series of displays illuminated above the chamber floor. Massive projections, rotating slowly in the air. The planet appeared. Brown. Grey. Violet at the edges. Wrapped in storm systems that moved in opposing directions, atmospheric layers sliding over one another like gears that did not quite fit. It looked unstable. Not violently, but constantly. Like something that never stopped being dangerous. Surface gravity, Kael'thir said, is measured at 1.28 standard. Not enough to kill. Enough to wear you down. Day cycle, 18 hours. Temperature variance between -40 and +70 degrees. Again, survivable. But only just. Ilara watched the projection without expression. He continued. The atmosphere consists of 4 distinct layers. 3 are incompatible with unfiltered human respiration. There it was. Plain. Unhidden. You cannot breathe here. Not without machines. Not without constant support. The projection shifted. Terrain maps. Mineral scans. Environmental data streams. All biological surveys indicate a highly active ecosystem, Kael'thir said. Megafauna present. Flora exhibiting chemical defense mechanisms. That phrasing was deliberate. Chemical defense mechanisms. Clean. Clinical. What it meant was simpler. Everything on that planet was trying to hurt you. Ilara finally spoke. Define megafauna. Kael'thir did not hesitate. Average height, 12 meters. A pause. Largest recorded, 17. The projection adjusted. A silhouette appeared beside a human scale marker. The difference was absolute. Not predator and prey. Not even comparable. Behavioral patterns suggest territorial movement rather than active hunting. Another carefully chosen statement. Not actively hunting. Which did not mean safe. It meant, if you are in the way, you stop existing. The projection shifted again. Now vegetation. Dense, low-lying growth across wide valleys. A soft, almost pleasant coloration. If direct contact occurs, Kael'thur said, localized neurological disruption is expected. Extended exposure results in systemic tissue degradation. Another clean sentence. Another translation. It burns you from the inside out. Ilara's gaze didn't change. Not at the creatures. Not at the plants. Not at the atmospheric data scrolling endlessly in the air. Because she already knew. Every number. Every risk. Every missing detail. She had read the public reports. And the ones that didn't exist publicly. Kael'thur continued, voice steady, controlled. Despite these challenges, Virex 9 possesses significant resource potential. Mineral density exceeds regional averages by a factor of 3. Subsurface energy signatures indicate long-term sustainability for industrial development. There it was. The justification. The reason it was being called an opportunity. Under the terms of this offer, he said, humanity will be granted full colonial sovereignty. The words were important. Full. Colonial. Sovereignty. No assembly oversight. No resource tithe. No territorial restrictions. Now that was unusual. Not rare. Unheard of. Every species in the chamber understood the implication. The assembly did not give away control. Ever. Unless the thing they were giving away had already been decided as worthless. Or worse. Dangerous to keep. Ilara leaned forward slightly. Not in interest. In focus. And in return? She asked. Kael'thur's expression did not change. There is no return condition. That was the most dangerous sentence spoken so far. No return condition meant, we don't expect anything back. Because we don't expect you to survive long enough for it to matter. Silence settled again. But this time, it wasn't controlled. It was heavier. Because now the shape of the offer was complete. A world no one could live on. Total independence. No oversight. No help. No rescue. It was perfect. Perfectly designed. Ilara sat back. Slowly. As if considering. As if weighing variables. As if this were a real decision. Inside, her thoughts were precise. Cold. Ordered. This wasn't generosity. It was disposal. Humanity had become inconvenient. Not through aggression. Not through war. Through persistence. Through connection. Through refusing to behave the way smaller species were supposed to behave. They built alliances where none were expected. They survived where others withdrew. They asked questions. Too many questions. And now, the assembly had found a solution that required no conflict. No public action. No visible force. Just an offer. And a signature. Across the chamber, one of the delegates shifted slightly. Another leaned closer to their console. Watching. Waiting. Because this was the moment that mattered. Not the presentation. Not the data. The decision. Ilara then exhaled slowly. Then looked directly at Kael'thur. You've already calculated our acceptance probability, she said. Not a question. A statement. Kael'thur did not answer immediately. Which was, in itself, an answer. Based on observed human behavioral patterns, he said finally, the likelihood of acceptance is high. Of course it was. Because humans did not back away from difficult things. They moved toward them. Especially when told they shouldn't. Ilara nodded once. Small. Acknowledging. Then she asked the only question that actually mattered. What classification would you assign the survival rate of a first-wave colony? There was a pause. Short. Measured. Kael'thur answered. Within projected parameters. Not a number. Not a percentage. A deflection. Ilara held his gaze. 3 seconds. 4. Then she leaned back again. And for the second time since entering the chamber. She smiled. Faint. Controlled. But unmistakable. Understood, she said. One of the delegates across the chamber made a subtle movement. Relief. They thought this was proceeding as expected. They thought the pressure had worked. They thought the outcome was already decided. Kael'thas inclined his head slightly. The assembly will allow you time to consider the offer. Another formality. Another illusion of choice. Ilara stood. That broke the rhythm. Most envoys stayed seated. They prolonged the moment. They asked for deliberation. She didn't. I won't need time, she said. That caused the first real shift in the room. Small, but undeniable. Because now, they were no longer fully in control of the pacing. Ilara stepped away from the table. Paused. Just briefly. Then said. Humanity accepts the offer. And that was the moment everything locked into place. Across the chamber, tension released. Subtle, but visible. Postures eased. Attention shifted. Because to them, this was over. The problem had been solved. Cleanly, quietly, permanently. Ilara turned toward the exit. And as she walked, she did not look back. Because she already knew something they didn't. They believed they had just ended humanity's expansion. What they had actually done was give humanity a reason. Ilara Venn did not return to her quarters immediately. She walked. Not aimlessly, she never did anything aimlessly, but without visible urgency. Through the assembly corridors. Past observation galleries. Past other envoys who glanced at her and then quickly looked away, as if proximity alone might pull them into something they didn't want to be part of. The corridors were designed like the hall. Subtle curvature. Controlled lighting. Materials that absorbed sound just enough to make footsteps feel isolated. Everything here was engineered. Including the illusion of neutrality. Ilara stopped at a viewing pane that overlooked the transit docks. Ships moved below in silent precision, assembly vessels, long-range carriers, diplomatic transports. Traffic flowed like a machine that had never once needed to stop and think about itself. For most species, this view inspired awe. For Ilara, it confirmed something else. Scale without accountability. She stood there for a long moment. Then turned and continued walking. Her quarters were exactly what she expected. Perfect temperature. Perfect lighting. Perfect silence. A space designed not for comfort, but for compliance. She ignored most of it. Crossed the room. Activated the terminal embedded into the wall. It responded instantly. Of course it did. Assembly systems always did. Display. Virex 9. Full environmental dataset. The public file appeared first. Clean. Organized. Complete. And incomplete in all the ways that mattered. Ilara read it once. Then again. Not because she needed to. Because repetition clarified gaps. Then she switched inputs. A different command. One that didn't exist in the system's standard interface. The terminal paused. Not long. But long enough to confirm it was accessing something it wasn't supposed to acknowledge. A second file opened. No formatting. No visual polish. Raw data. Atmospheric composition expanded beyond the summarized layers. Detailed toxicity breakdowns. Time to failure metrics for unprotected exposure. Ilara's eyes moved across the numbers. 3 minutes. In some regions, less. She scrolled. Gravitational variance across terrain zones. Localized spikes. Not enough to crush. Enough to destabilize. Constantly. She kept going. Fauna behavior logs. Not summarized. Full recordings. Patterns that the public data had labeled as territorial movement resolved into something else when viewed in full. Consistency. Repetition. Roots. Not wandering. Not random. Structured. Ilara paused there. Just for a second. Then continued. Flora toxicity profiles. The public file had been polite. The classified one was not. Neural disruption. Cellular breakdown. Progression curves. It didn't kill quickly. It dismantled. Slowly. Precisely. She exhaled once. Then opened the final file. The one that mattered most. The one she had paid for. Not with currency. With something harder to replace. Access. Trust. Time. The file loaded. Smaller than the others. Simpler. Because the most dangerous information rarely needed length. It needed clarity. Classification anomaly report. Ilara read it. Once. No need for repetition this time. The meaning was immediate. Virex 9 had not always been Class 15. 800 years ago. It had been Class 3. Habitable. Stable. Alive. Her gaze didn't change. But something behind it sharpened. She scrolled. Fragments of older survey data. Atmospheric composition. Breathable. Surface biosphere. Complex. Civilization markers. Confirmed. Not ruins. Not extinct. Active. Developing. The file didn't say what happened. Not directly. It didn't need to. Because the next section filled the gap. Timeline. Environmental degradation. Not natural. Patterned. Systematic. 40-year window. 40 years from habitable world to collapse. Not destruction. Transformation. Deliberate. Ilara leaned back slightly. Her mind was already assembling it. The shape of the thing. The method. You don't remove a civilization loudly. You don't announce it. You don't leave evidence that invites retaliation. You make it disappear. Quietly. Biologically. Ecologically. You turn a living world into a place no one would ever want. And then. You call it uninhabitable. She closed the file. Not because she was finished. Because she wasn't. Because she understood enough. And the rest. The rest would come later. She stood there for a while. Looking at nothing. Which, in a room like this, meant she was thinking about everything. 50,000 people. That was the number. Not abstract. Not theoretical. She had the list. Every name. Every profession. Every reason for being selected. Engineers. Doctors. Agricultural specialists. Children. People who had signed up for something difficult. Not something impossible. Not something designed to erase them. She could warn them. That option existed. She could send everything. The full data. The truth. What Virex 9 really was. What it had been. What it meant. She imagined it. The message going out. The reaction. The hesitation. The refusal. Because they would refuse. Most of them. Not all. But enough. Enough to stop the mission. And then. The assembly would adjust. They always did. Quietly. Efficiently. If the colony didn't go. The solution would change. It wouldn't be public. It wouldn't be offered. It would simply happen. And there would be no colony. No witnesses. No data coming back from the surface. No proof. Just 50,000 names that would eventually stop appearing in records. A closed file. A resolved problem. Ilara rested her hands on the edge of the terminal. Steady. Still. This was the decision. Not the one in the chamber. That had already been made. This one. This was the real one. Tell them. And they might live. For a while. Until something quieter replaced the plan. Or. Let them go. Let them reach the surface. Let them see. Let them survive long enough to understand what had been done. And then. Let the truth spread from there. Messy. Dangerous. Uncontrolled. Real. Ilara closed her eyes. Just briefly. Not hesitation. Calculation. Then she opened them again. Decision made. She began working. The first system she activated was not assembly issued. It wasn't even visible in the room. It existed layered beneath standard infrastructure. Something she had built over years. Carefully. Quietly. A network of relay points. Independent channels. Contacts who did not belong to the assembly and did not trust it. The kind of system you built when you expected to need it someday. She hadn't known when. Or why. Only that the day would come. It had. Initialize secure channel, she said. No response. Not audibly. But the system activated. She knew it had. The interface appeared, not on the main display, but as a thin overlay only she could see. Prepare transmission package. She began assembling it. Not everything. Not yet. That would be too early. Too obvious. Too easy to intercept. This transmission had a different purpose. Foundation. The first file, full environmental data, public and classified. 12 languages. Clean. Structured. No interpretation. Just facts. The second file, contact network. Every independent relay. Every system outside assembly jurisdiction. Encrypted. Layered. The third file. She paused. This one mattered. Not data. Not analysis. Message. She kept it simple. No accusations. No conclusions. Just organization. Context. A structure that would make sense later. When more pieces arrived. She wrote it the way someone writes something meant to be read in the future. Calm. Precise. Patient. Then she sealed it. Transmit. The system engaged. No sound. No confirmation tone. Just a silent progression bar moving across a space that didn't officially exist. 40 seconds. That was all it took. 40 seconds to set something in motion that could not be easily stopped. When it finished, the interface disappeared. The system wiped itself. No trace. No record. As if it had never been there. Ilara stepped back from the terminal. The room returned to its default state. Perfect. Controlled. Empty. She crossed to the small preparation unit and made coffee. Real coffee. Not assembly synthesized. From a supply she kept for specific moments. She poured it. Sat down near the viewing pane. Outside, the artificial fountains in the plaza ran continuously. Flowing water. Another engineered detail. Another tool. She took a sip. And waited. Not for confirmation. Not for results. Those would take time. What she had started wasn't immediate. It wasn't supposed to be. It was a process. One that would unfold in layers. Across systems. Across species. Across time. Somewhere beyond the assembly's control. Somewhere the truth could exist long enough to matter. Ilara looked out at the plaza. Calm. Ordered. Artificial. And allowed herself one quiet thought. They believed this was the end of the problem. They believed Virex 9 would solve it. They believed silence would follow. She took another sip of coffee. Steady. Certain. They're wrong, she said softly. The loading process took 3 weeks. Not because it had to. Because humanity didn't rush things that mattered. From the observation deck above Transit Bay 7, the colony ship hung in place, massive, patient, waiting. It wasn't elegant like assembly vessels. It didn't need to be. It was built to work. Cargo moved first. Thousands of containers drifting through the docking field in steady, controlled lines. Each one tagged, tracked, and routed with quiet precision. Structural components. Atmospheric processors. Hydroponic systems. Medical units. Power generators. Everything required to build a civilization. Compressed into something that could fit inside a machine. Ilara stood at the glass, watching it all move. She didn't look for patterns. She already understood the pattern. This was what humans did. They brought everything with them. Because they assumed nothing would be given. Below, a cluster of engineering modules rotated slowly as they were guided into the ship's lower hull. 8,000 engineers. Largest group on the manifest. Not by accident. You don't survive impossible places with optimism. You survive them with people who know how things work, and how to fix them when they don't. Ilara tracked one of the incoming teams as they moved through the boarding corridor. Durin Hale walked at the front. He wasn't the tallest in the group. But he was the one everyone unconsciously followed. Broad-shouldered. Mid-40s. Movement efficient without being rushed. He carried a tablet in one hand, already reviewing structural layouts that would not matter for another 3 weeks. Planning didn't wait for arrival. It started before departure. It always did. At his side walked a young girl. 9 years old. Dark hair tied back in a loose braid. An inhaler clipped to her belt. She wasn't looking at the ship. She was looking at everything else. The people. The motion. The scale. Children didn't focus on the obvious. They focused on what felt new. "Dad," she said, glancing up at him, "is it bigger than the last one?" Durin didn't look up from his tablet. "Everything's bigger than the last one," he said. It wasn't dismissive. Just accurate. She seemed satisfied with that. Turned her attention back to the corridor ahead. Her name was Lyra Hale. Ilara knew that. She knew all of them. Every name on the manifest. She had read the list 3 times. Not out of obligation. Out of necessity. Because numbers were easy. Names were not. Names stayed. Medical teams boarded next. Just under 6,000. Doctors. Nurses. Specialists. People trained to keep others alive when conditions made that difficult. At the front of one group walked Dr. Amadi Nwosu. She moved with the calm efficiency of someone who had spent years working in environments where hesitation cost lives. Her bag was smaller than most. Packed with essentials. Tools she trusted. Everything else. She would adapt. She always had. Her file listed 15 years of emergency medicine experience. It didn't list the number of lives she had saved. Or the number she hadn't. Those weren't numbers people kept in official records. But they shaped how you moved. How you decided. How you worked when things went wrong. And things would go wrong. On Virex 9. That wasn't a possibility. It was a guarantee. The civilians came after. Not because they were less important. Because they required less coordination. Families. Individuals. People who had chosen to go. That was the part the assembly didn't understand. This wasn't a forced deployment. Not technically. Every person here had signed up. They had read the briefing. They had seen the risks. Or at least, the version of the risks that had been made public. And they had said yes. Because humans did that. They went toward difficult things. Especially when those things came with space. Opportunity. A chance to build something new. Marcus Vale was one of the last to board. He carried a case over his shoulder. Long. Worn. Carefully maintained. A saxophone. 3 changes of clothes. A data pad filled with music. A photograph folded into the inside pocket of his jacket. He paused at the boarding gate. Looked at the ship. Then at the stars beyond it. He had never left his home world before. He had expected to feel something larger. Awe. Fear. Excitement. Instead, he felt quiet. Not empty. Just still. Like the moment before something began. He stepped forward. Didn't look back. Ilara remained on the observation deck. Watching. Not intervening. Not signaling. Just observing. Because this was the part that mattered. Not the assembly chamber. Not the offer. The people. Durin paused at the base of the boarding ramp. Just for a second. Looked up at the structure. Not overwhelmed. Assessing. Always assessing. Load distribution. Entry points. Structural seams. Even now. Even here. Lyra tugged lightly at his sleeve. "Are there mountains?" she asked. Durin finally looked down at her. "Yeah," he said. "There are mountains." She smiled. That was enough. The brochure had mentioned mountains. It had not mentioned what lived in them. Durin knew that. Or at least, he suspected. He had read enough reports to understand one thing clearly. Nothing about this would be easy. But difficulty wasn't new. He had spent 20 years rebuilding infrastructure in cities that were always one failure away from collapse. He knew how to work with less. He knew how to build under pressure. He knew how to keep things standing when they wanted to fall. That skill, that mindset, was why he was here. He stepped onto the ramp. Lyra followed. Neither of them hesitated. Inside the ship, systems activated in sequence. Environmental controls. navigation arrays, life support networks, each system checking the others. Redundancy layered over redundancy, because failure was expected and prepared for. Ilara watched the final boarding group enter. The doors sealed behind them. Slow, deliberate, final. Across the bay, assembly observers stood in designated positions, monitoring, recording. They did not watch the people. They watched the process. Efficiency metrics, timeline adherence, outcome probabilities. To them, this was logistics. To Ilara, it was something else. She turned away from the glass. Not because she didn't want to watch. Because she had seen enough. The rest would happen without her. For now, the departure sequence began without ceremony. No speeches. No announcements. Just motion. The ship disengaged from the docking clamps. Thrusters ignited in controlled bursts. And slowly, the colony began to move. Lyra pressed her face to one of the interior viewports, watching the station drift away. "Does it feel different?" she asked. Durin shook his head. "Not yet," he said. "It will." Marcus sat by a window further down the corridor, saxophone case resting across his lap. He hadn't opened it yet. Hadn't needed to. He watched the stars. They didn't look different. Not really. Just further. Dr. Nwosu moved through the medical bay. Already organizing. Already preparing. Because arrival wouldn't give them time to get ready. Preparation happened now. Or not at all. From the observation deck, Ilara tracked the ship as it cleared the station. Smaller now. Then smaller still. Until it was just another object moving through space. Indistinguishable from any other. Unless you knew what it carried. 50,000 people. 50,000 decisions. 50,000 lives moving toward something they did not fully understand. She stood there until the ship disappeared from visible range. Then she turned. Walked back through the corridor. Through the controlled light. Through the engineered silence. Her expression unchanged. Her pace steady. Because the next phase had already begun. And this time, she wouldn't be able to see it from here. Far beyond the assembly station, the colony ship accelerated. Faster than light. Toward Virex 9. Toward a world that had been carefully chosen. Carefully presented. Carefully misunderstood. And inside, 50,000 people moved through the early hours of a journey they believed would change their lives. They were right. Just not in the way they expected. Speaker Kael'thur did not watch the colony ship depart. He had already seen the outcome. Not visually. Statistically. From his chamber in the assembly's inner complex, he reviewed the projection models again. Not because he doubted them, but because confirmation was part of discipline. 12 layered simulations. 12 variations of environmental variables. All converging toward the same conclusion. Failure. Timeframe variance. 3 to 5 months. Median. 4. He closed the projections. Not with satisfaction. With completion. The matter was resolved. The assembly did not think in terms of cruelty. It thought in terms of stability. Cruelty implied intent. Emotion. The assembly operated beyond that. Or at least, it believed it did. Kael'thur moved to the central console as a new report surfaced. Human expansion analysis. Updated. He opened it. The data was precise. Always precise. 11 years since humanity had achieved interstellar capability. In that time, they had established contact with 23 independent species. 7 of those had previously maintained limited or no engagement with the assembly. 3 had entered cooperative agreements with humanity directly. Without consultation. Without oversight. That was the problem. Not aggression. Not violation. Independence. Humans did not follow expected patterns. They did not wait for permission structures to form. They did not accept isolation as a natural state. They connected things. People. Systems. Information. And in doing so, they altered balance. Kael'thur adjusted the display. A second dataset appeared. Conflict zones. Regions where controlled tension was maintained between species. Not open war. Never open war. That was inefficient. But pressure. Pressure was useful. It kept systems predictable. Contained. Directed. 3 years ago, human diplomats had entered one of those regions. Uninvited. The Vorin-Sek-Hel corridor. A long-standing controlled conflict. 40 years of managed hostility. Useful. Stable. Human intervention had lasted 4 months. For months. They negotiated. Adapted. Refused to disengage. And eventually. Resolved it. Completely. The conflict ended. The corridor stabilized. And the assembly lost its primary leverage point in that region. Kael'thur paused the display. That had been the moment. Not when humans arrived. Not when they expanded. When they interfered with something that was not meant to be resolved. That was when the classification changed. From developing species to variable. Variables could not be left uncontrolled. Not at scale. The chamber door opened behind him. 3 delegates entered. Senior members. Selected. Aligned. They did not sit. This was not a formal session. It was confirmation. The colony has departed, one of them said. Kael'thur inclined his head slightly. Yes. No elaboration. None was needed. Another delegate activated a secondary display. Colony manifest. 50,000 individuals. Projected resource consumption. Infrastructure deployment timelines. All parameters remain within expected ranges, the delegate said. Attrition curve. Kael'thur asked. The display shifted. A descending line. Steep. Then flattening. Then ending. Initial losses within the first 10 days, the delegate replied. Environmental exposure. Structural instability. Fauna interaction. Standard. Predictable. After that, he continued, resource depletion accelerates failure rate. Kael'thur nodded once. Clean. Efficient. No intervention required. That was the key. The elegance of the solution. No fleets. No conflict. No visible force. Just conditions. Conditions that produced a result. Article 7, subsection C has been confirmed, another delegate added. Clarify, Kael'thur said. Colonial sovereignty removes assembly obligation to respond to distress signals. Of course it did. It was written that way. Carefully. Deliberately. Buried beneath language that appeared generous. Independent. Empowering. But in practice, it meant one thing. No rescue. No intervention. No responsibility. The colony would exist. Until it didn't. And when it didn't, there would be no record of interference. No accusation. Just outcome. Probability of external inquiry. One delegate asked. Kael'thur considered. Minimal, he said. Human expansion beyond assembly space is limited. Their communication network remains dependent on standard relay structures, which were monitored, controlled, filtered. Even if a signal were sent, it would arrive late, fragmented, insufficient. And by then, the colony would already be gone. The system closed. Quietly. As it always did. A new feed appeared on the console. Live orbital observation. Virex 9. The planet rotated slowly. Storm systems shifting across its surface. Atmospheric bands sliding over one another in constant motion. It looked unstable. Hostile. Perfect. Estimated survival window. The third delegate asked. Kael'thur didn't need to check. For months, he said. A pause. Then. 3. Under accelerated conditions. The delegate accepted that. Because the models supported it. Because the system was reliable. Because it had worked before. Not often. Not recently. But enough. Enough to establish precedent. Enough to ensure confidence. Kael'thur deactivated the display. The chamber dimmed slightly. The conversation was ending. The outcome was set. There will be no further action required, he said. Continue standard operations. The delegates inclined their heads, turned, exited. No ceremony, no reflection, just movement. From one resolved matter to the next. Kael'thas remained alone, which was not unusual. He preferred it. It allowed for uninterrupted processing. He brought the planetary feed back online. Watched it. Not emotionally. Not with interest. With evaluation. Storm density. Surface temperature shifts. Atmospheric instability. All within expected parameters. Everything functioning exactly as designed. He allowed himself a single internal conclusion. Humanity would not survive Virex 9. Not because they were weak. Not because they lacked intelligence. But because the environment was absolute. There were limits. Every species had them. Even humans. Especially humans. Because humans relied on systems. And systems failed. Eventually. Inevitably. The planet would ensure that. Given enough time. Which they did not have. He turned away from the display. Moved toward the chamber exit. There was other work. There was always other work. The assembly did not pause. It processed. It adjusted. It continued. Behind him, the image of Virex 9 remained. Turning. Unchanged. Waiting. A solution already in motion. A problem already resolved. What Kael'thas did not account for. What the models did not include. What the assembly had never fully understood. Was not human strength. Not resilience. Not even adaptability. It was something simpler. Something quieter. Something far more dangerous. Humans did not stop when systems failed. They changed the systems. And then. They kept going. Far from the assembly. The colony ship continued its trajectory. Carrying 50,000 people toward a world designed to end them. And toward something else. Something the assembly had buried long before humanity ever reached the stars. Something waiting beneath the surface. Unseen. Uncounted. Unfinished. The planet looked worse up close. From orbit, Virex 9 had seemed distant. Abstract. A problem to be solved. Inside the descent corridor. It became real. Brown and violet cloud bands tore across the viewports, moving in opposing directions. Lightning flickered inside the atmosphere, not in clean arcs, but in fractured, branching pulses that lingered longer than they should have. The ship shook. Not violently. Constantly. Like something pressing against it from every direction at once. Entry angle holding, a pilot reported. Adjusting for lateral drift. Drift wasn't supposed to happen like this. Not at this scale. Durin Hale stood behind the navigation station, one hand resting on the console, not interfering, just grounding himself. Watching. Calculating. The data didn't match the projections. Not exactly. Close enough to pass review. Not close enough to trust. Atmospheric density spike at layer 3, another voice said. Compensating. The ship adjusted. Thrusters firing in short, controlled bursts. Each correction slightly delayed. Each delay adding pressure. Lyra sat strapped into her seat near the rear viewport. She wasn't afraid. Not yet. She was watching. Children always watched first. Fear came later. Dad, she said, voice steady. Is it supposed to move like that? Durin didn't turn. No, he said. Then, after a beat. We'll adjust. Not reassurance. Truth. Filtered just enough. The descent took 14 hours. 14 hours of constant correction. Constant recalculation. Constant strain on systems that had not been designed for this level of instability. By the time the first landing thrusters engaged, everyone on board understood one thing clearly. The models had been wrong. Not completely. But enough. Enough to matter. The first ship touched down at 8:12 local. The landing struts hit the surface. And sank. 2 feet deeper than projected. The hull shifted. Stabilizers fired instantly, compensating, holding. But the message was clear. The ground was not what they had been told it was. Durin was already moving. Recalculate load distribution, he said, voice calm, controlled. Adjust anchor depth for all incoming units. No panic. No hesitation. Just response. That was how you survived the first impact. You didn't react emotionally. You adjusted mechanically. 6 ships. 6 landings. Each one harder than the last. Dust clouds rose in massive plumes, carried sideways by winds that didn't follow predictable patterns. By the time the final transport settled, the colony existed. Barely. The domes deployed within the hour. Pre-assembled units unfolding from cargo containers. Expanding. Locking. Sealing. Faster than simulation. That was the first good sign. Small. But real. Air processors activated. Cycling. Filtering. Converting an atmosphere that wanted to kill them into something that wouldn't. At 1432, Dome 1 registered breathable air. Helmets came off. One by one. The sound that followed. 50,000 people exhaling. Wasn't loud. But it was heavy. Relief had weight. It lasted 4 hours. At 1907, Dome 3 failed. The breach was small. A junction panel. Hairline fracture. Stress from landing. Something the models hadn't accounted for. Or hadn't cared to. The seal gave. Unfiltered air entered. Fast. Invisible. Deadly. Emergency protocols triggered instantly. Closure systems engaged. Sealed the breach in 11 seconds. 11 seconds was enough. 7 people were in the exposure zone. They collapsed before the alarm finished sounding. Dr. Nwosu was already moving. Already there. Already working. It didn't matter. 3 minutes. That was the upper limit. They didn't have 3 minutes. They never did. She checked them anyway. All 7. Because you always checked. Even when you knew. Then she stood. Looked at the breach. Then at the people around her. Seal redundancy isn't enough, she said. Not emotional. Not loud. Just precise. Fix it. Day 2 was quiet. Not peaceful. Careful. People moved slower. Checked things twice. Didn't look directly at Dome 3. Because looking made it real. And they already knew it was real. At dusk. The ground moved. Not the planet. Something on it. The first megafauna appeared on the eastern perimeter. 12 meters tall. Grey-brown. Massive. Not aggressive. Not hunting. Just moving. Toward something. And the colony was in the way. Perimeter markers went down first. Crushed without resistance. Not intentionally. Not violently. The creature didn't even acknowledge them. They were just there. Then gone. Barrier deployment, someone shouted. Emergency systems activated. Field generators came online. A faint hum spread across the perimeter. The creature stepped into it. Paused. Not reacting. Not retreating. Just experiencing it. Then it kept moving. Through. Like the barrier didn't matter. Because to something that size, it didn't. The outer perimeter collapsed in 40 seconds. What followed was not chaos. Not exactly. It was structured panic. People moving with purpose. Training holding just enough to keep things from breaking completely. Durin was in the engineering bay. Already working. Field strength is wrong, someone said. It's not calibrated for this mass. Then recalibrate, Durin replied. No shouting. No urgency in his voice. Because urgency didn't fix things. Precision did. Adjust frequency, he continued. Not power. Frequency. The difference mattered. The team moved. Fast. Focused. Outside. The creature reached the secondary markers. Stepped over them. Not even noticing. Inside. The recalibration completed. The field shifted. Subtle. Almost invisible. The creature stopped. Just stopped. Not pushed back. Not repelled. Paused. Then, slowly, it turned and continued its path. Around the colony. Not through it. The migration continued. Behind it. More shapes. More movement. A line. A pattern. Not random. Never random. 3 hours later. The last of them passed. The perimeter. Gone. 12 more dead. Durin didn't sleep. He sat in the engineering bay. Coffee cold beside him. Screens filled with data. Barrier frequencies. Load tolerances. Material stress curves. Run it again, he said. His team didn't argue. Didn't question. They ran it again. And again. Because that was how this worked. You didn't get it right the first time. You got it right. Eventually. Or you didn't survive long enough for it to matter. At 4 o'clock. They had a new system. Not perfect. Better. We've worked with worse, Durin said. It wasn't true. Everyone knew it wasn't true. No one said anything. Because belief wasn't required. Function was. Month 1. Was attrition. 89 dead. Dome failures. Fauna encounters. Environmental exposure. 2 medical cases that would have been minor anywhere else. Fatal here. Because resources were limited. Because time was limited. Because everything was limited. The number mattered. But not as much as the pattern. Loss. Adjustment. Loss. Adaptation. Repeat. The plant life became the next problem. It looked harmless. Soft. Almost pleasant. Smelled faintly like cinnamon. They called it sweet grass. Because humans named things. It made them easier to deal with. The toxin didn't care what it was called. It spread through the root system. Invisible beneath the surface. If you stood on it too long, it found you. Through seams. Through microfractures. Through anything that wasn't perfect. Nothing was perfect. For people learned that. The hard way. The solution. Was better seals. Better scanners. Better protocols. Everything became better. Or it failed. Marcus planted something in his quarters. A small cactus. It didn't belong here. That was the point. It was something alive. Something familiar. Something that didn't try to kill you. He watered it. Carefully. Like that mattered. Maybe it did. By the end of month 1. The colony still existed. Not stable. Not secure. But present. And that was enough. For now. Because Virex 9 wasn't trying to kill them quickly. That would have been easier. Cleaner. It was doing something else. Something slower. Something more patient. It was applying pressure. Constant. Unforgiving. Waiting for systems to fail. Waiting for people to make mistakes. Waiting. For time to do the work. And time was the one thing the assembly had counted on. What they hadn't counted on was what humans did under pressure. They didn't break immediately. They adjusted. Then they adjusted again. And then they started learning. And that was where the problem began. Month 2 did not feel easier. It felt controlled. That was the difference. The same winds tore across the plains. The same toxic layers pressed against the domes. The same creatures moved along the horizon at dusk. Nothing about Virex 9 had changed. The colony had. The perimeter held. Not perfectly. Not always. But enough. The recalibrated field didn't push the megafauna back. That had never worked. Instead, it interrupted them. Just enough. A disruption in whatever internal pattern guided their movement. They would approach. Pause. Wait. Then choose a different path. Not forced. Not redirected. They decided. And that mattered more than force ever could. Durin stood at the perimeter one morning, watching the field flicker softly against the dust-heavy air. "Don't fight it," he said to the team behind him. "Work with it." No one argued. Because the evidence was standing in front of them. Alive. Moving. choosing. Inside the domes. Systems evolved. Not upgraded. Rebuilt. The original designs had been made for Class 9 environments. This was not that. Seal structures were reinforced with layered redundancies. Triple lock junctions. Adaptive pressure balancing. Materials repurposed from cargo not meant for this kind of use. Everything became flexible. Because rigid systems broke. Flexible ones. Adapted. 3 weeks without a seal failure. That number spread quietly. No announcements. No celebration. Just awareness. A small victory. That felt larger than it should have. The air processors changed next. Originally calibrated to filter. Now, they learned. Adaptive cycling. Reactive filtering based on atmospheric fluctuations. Not perfect. But closer. Closer mattered. Dr. Nwosu's medical bay expanded. From a converted cargo section. To something resembling a system. Triage units. Monitoring stations. Improvised surgical space. Still under-resourced. Still stretched. But functional. She moved through it the same way she always had. Focused. Efficient. Unwasting. Status, she asked one of her staff. Stabilized, they replied. Good, she said. Then moved on. No pause. No reflection. Because stabilization was temporary. It always was. Death slowed. Not stopped. But slowed. That was the first real shift. Not survival by chance. Survival by margin. Small. Fragile. But real. And with margin. Came something new. Time. Not much. Just enough. Enough for people to think beyond the next hour. The next failure. The next loss. They started building. Not just repairing. Building. A second dome. Connected by a corridor assembled from materials never intended for corridor construction. It held. Not because it was perfect. Because it was sufficient. Sufficient was enough. Hydroponics came online. 12 plant species. None thriving. All surviving. Under artificial light tuned to compensate for a sun that didn't behave correctly. The spectrum was wrong. The output inconsistent. The solution was adjustment. Always adjustment. Food production reached 20% of projected need. Not enough. Better than zero. Better mattered. The colony began to take shape. Not visually. Functionally. Paths formed between structures. Routines developed. Systems layered over systems. The randomness of arrival. Replaced by pattern. And pattern. Was control. Marcus started writing things down. Not music. Not yet. Observations. Fragments. Moments. Because he had realized something. This wasn't just happening. It was becoming. And things that became. Needed to be remembered. The school opened in month 3. No one planned it. No one approved it. It just started. 63 children. 2 teachers. A section of Dome 1 cleared of equipment and turned into something else. Not safe. Not stable. But necessary. Because survival wasn't enough. Not long-term. People needed something beyond that. Children especially. They needed structure. Learning. Normality. Even if it wasn't normal. Lyra sat in the front row. Not because she had to. Because she wanted to. She listened. Asked questions. The kind that made the teacher pause. Think. Answer carefully. She hadn't used her inhaler in 2 weeks. No one mentioned it at first. Then. Her father did. Quietly. To Dr. Nwosu. Check her, he said. Not worried. Not calm. Just. Aware. Nwosu ran the assessment. Routine. Standard. Then she ran it again. Not routine. Not standard. The results didn't match expectations. Lung function. Improved. Not slightly. Measurably. She didn't say anything immediately. Just recorded it. Because data came first. Understanding came later. The megafauna returned in month 3. Same pattern. Same route. Same massive presence moving across the horizon. This time, the colony was ready. The field held. Not by force. By interruption. The creatures approached. Paused. Waited. Then moved around. Every time. Consistent. Repeatable. That was new. Durin stood with the observation team. Watching. Not reacting. Studying. Map it, he said. Not avoidance paths. Behavior. That was the shift. They weren't just defending anymore. They were learning. Felix Arden joined the team in month 2. Ecologist. Young. Quiet. The kind of person who noticed things others didn't. He took the movement data, the patterns, the routes, and started layering them. Day after day. Week after week. The same paths. The same variations. Weather adjusted. Terrain influenced. But consistent. This isn't random, he said during one of the briefings. No one argued. Because it wasn't. They're following something, he continued. Not instinct. Not exactly. What then? Someone asked. Felix hesitated. Not uncertain. Precise. Structure, he said. Then shook his head slightly. Not the right word. But close. The colony shifted again. Subtly. But permanently. From reacting. To understanding. From surviving. To adapting. Death still happened. But they weren't constant anymore. They had space between them. Space to breathe. Space to think. Space to build something that wasn't just temporary. Durin stood at the edge of the perimeter one evening. Watching the horizon. The field flickered softly. Stable. For now. Behind him. Voices. Movement. Life. Not fragile. Not yet strong. But present. Persistent. That was enough. He took a sip of coffee. Cold. Didn't matter. We're not dying as fast, someone said beside him. Durin nodded once. That's step 1, he replied. What none of them knew. What the assembly could not see clearly from orbit. Was that something else had changed. Something deeper. Not in the systems. Not in the structures. In the people. They had stopped thinking of Virex 9 as something to survive. And started thinking of it as something to understand. And understanding was always the beginning of control. Far above. Assembly observation systems recorded the data. Thermal signatures expanding. Energy output increasing. Population decline slowing. All within variance. All within acceptable deviation. Nothing. That required attention. And that was the mistake. Because the moment a system decides something is within expected range, is usually the moment it stops looking closely. On Virex 9, humans kept looking, and what they were about to find would change everything. By month 5, the colony had learned the difference between danger and surprise. Danger was constant, predictable in its own way, measurable. Surprise was what killed you. So they removed it wherever they could. Systems logged everything. Atmospheric fluctuations. Barrier responses. Movement patterns. Human error rates. Every variable tracked. Every anomaly flagged. Because survival on Virex 9 wasn't about eliminating risk. It was about reducing uncertainty. The birth was not planned. Not officially. Priya Sen had known before departure. She had run the calculations. Time. Transit. Arrival. Risk. She had decided to go anyway. Because she was the best structural materials engineer on the manifest. And because leaving her behind had never really been an option. Dr. Nwosu had found out in week 3. Not from a report. From observation. Fatigue patterns. Physiological markers. She hadn't confronted her immediately. She adjusted schedules. Allocated resources quietly. Prepared. Because that was what you did. You adapted. Even when the system wasn't designed for it. Day 147. The storm began at 3 o'clock. Pressure fluctuations across all domes. Wind shear exceeding projected limits. Seal strain rising. Nothing failing. Everything stressed. Perfect conditions. For something small to go wrong. Priya went into labor at 5:12. No panic. No alarm. Just movement. Controlled. Directed. She was transferred to the medical bay. Nwosu was already there. Already prepared. Vitals stable, one of the staff reported. Good, Nwosu said. Let's keep it that way. Outside. The storm pressed against the colony. Inside. Everything narrowed. Focused. Birth didn't wait for conditions. It happened anyway. The delivery was difficult. Not catastrophic. But close enough to matter. Time stretched. Compressed. Measured in breaths. In decisions. In adjustments. At 7:48. The child was born. A girl. Crying immediately. Strong. Responsive. Alive. Nwosu allowed herself one small exhale. Then went back to work. Because birth wasn't the end. It was the beginning of vulnerability. Name? Someone asked. Priya, exhausted, voice barely above a whisper. Amora. It was recorded. Time stamp. Designation. Life added to a system that had been losing them. At 8:20. The error happened. Not a failure. Not a system breakdown. A human mistake. Obi was running a routine diagnostic on the ventilation system. Standard procedure. 30 seconds. Internal loop only. That was the design. His hand moved. One input off. One sequence misaligned. The system responded. Exactly as instructed. Not as intended. The external vent opened. No sound. No warning. Just exposure. Unfiltered Virex 9 atmosphere entered the medical bay. 3 hostile layers. All of them active. The sensors triggered at 4.3 seconds. Emergency closure engaged immediately. The vent sealed. The system corrected. The alarm sounded. But the damage should have already been done. Amora was on the examination table. 32 minutes old. No filters. No protection. She inhaled. Reflex. Automatic. Unaware. Alive. The air hit her lungs. And then, it was gone. Replaced by filtered atmosphere. Controlled. Safe. The room froze. Not literally, but functionally. For a fraction of a second. Everything stopped. Obi was already moving. Already reaching for the emergency respiratory kit. His hands shaking. Face drained of color. Understanding hitting faster than thought. Nwosu was faster. At the table. Scanning. Assessing. Working. No panic. No delay. Just action. She ran the diagnostics. Once. Twice. 3 times. Amora breathed. Steady. Regular. No distress. No reaction. No. Anything. Nwosu stopped. Looked at the readings. Then at the child. Then back at the readings. Run it again, she said. Voice calm. Flat. Controlled. They ran it again. Same result. Obi stepped back. Hands still shaking. He didn't finish. Didn't need to. Everyone in the room knew what he was trying to say. What he thought he had done. What should have happened. It doesn't make sense, one of the staff whispered. Nwosu didn't respond. She didn't deal in sense. She dealt in data. And the data was wrong. Or everything else was. Full scan, she said. Now. They ran it. Comprehensive. Detailed. Deep. Every system. Every function. Every measurable parameter. Results came back. Clean. Perfect. Impossible. The room stayed quiet. Not out of shock. Out of processing. Trying to fit something into a framework that didn't allow for it. Amora shifted slightly. Small movement. Normal. Alive. Obi sat down heavily against the wall. Breathing uneven. I exposed her, he said. not a question. A statement. Nwosu looked at him. Not unkindly. Not softly. Just. Directly. Yes, she said. Then, after a pause. And she's still alive. That was the problem. Not the mistake. Not the exposure. The outcome. Nwosu ran the assessment again. Fourth time. Because repetition eliminated doubt. Or confirmed it. Same result. No damage. No degradation. No response to an atmosphere that, by every model, should have destroyed her lungs in seconds. Log it, she said. Everything. No interpretation. No conclusions. Just data. Clean. Accurate. Complete. Because this, whatever this was, would matter. Later. Outside. The storm continued. Unchanged. Unaware. The planet did not react. Did not adjust. Did not care. Inside. Something had shifted. Not visibly. Not dramatically. But fundamentally. A rule had been broken. And no one knew why. The report took 9 weeks to compile. Not rushed. Not simplified. Every variable examined. Every possibility tested. Contamination. Equipment failure. Measurement error. All eliminated. One by one. Until only the result remained. The conclusion was a single paragraph. 3 words at the end. Words no scientist liked to write. Because they didn't solve anything. They only acknowledged it. This should not. In the assembly. The report arrived. Processed. Reviewed. Read. And then. Read again. Kael'thur sat with it longer than expected. Not because he didn't understand it. Because he did. And understanding made it worse. He closed the file. Not dismissed. Not resolved. Just set aside. Because the system didn't account for anomalies. It corrected them. Or ignored them. Until they mattered. On Virex 9. Amora slept. Breathing. Unfiltered. Unchanged. She did not know what she had done. She did not know what she represented. She did not know that in 4.3 seconds, she had broken something far larger than herself. And that would change everything. The request for a deep survey had been sitting in the system for 11 months. Denied twice. Delayed once. Approved quietly. Not because priorities had changed. Because capacity had. By month 37, the colony had margin. Not comfort. Never comfort. But enough stability to look beyond immediate survival. Power demands were rising. Surface systems wouldn't scale forever. The next step was obvious. Go deeper. Durin Hale reviewed the deployment plan at 6:40. 6 drilling drones. Autonomous. Rated for extreme conditions. Maximum depth. 12 kilometers. More than enough. Or so the specifications claimed. He didn't trust specifications. He trusted results. Run full diagnostics, he said. Twice. The team complied. Because that was the rule now. Trust nothing once. Verify everything twice. The drones deployed at 8:10. 6 points across the plains. Evenly distributed. Mapped. Calculated. Each one began its descent into Virex 9's crust. Rock gave way slowly. Layer by layer. Density within expected ranges. Thermal output stable. Everything. Normal. For the first 3 hours. The mineral data came back first. High density or veins. Consistent. Abundant. Enough to support expansion for decades. Durin allowed himself a single nod. That part. Made sense. The assembly didn't give away worthless systems. There was always something underneath. At 11:22. The first anomaly flagged. Drone 3. Depth. 10.8 kilometers. Signal return inconsistent. Not corrupted. Structured. Which was worse. Bring it up, Durin said. The data streamed across the central display. Layer composition. Density shifts. Geological mapping. Then, interruption. Avoid. Not natural. The edges. Too clean. Angles. Too precise. Durin leaned forward slightly. Not reacting. Focusing. Cross-check, he said. Compare with public geological profile. The system complied, overlaying the official data. The difference was immediate. The public record showed solid rock. Uniform. Continuous. What the drone was reporting was not that. Not even close. Run it again, someone said. They did. Same result. Other drones? Durin asked. Checking. Moments passed. Then, Drone 1, same anomaly. 11 kilometers. Drone 5, confirmed. Drone 2, confirming now. A pause. Then, confirmed. 4 of 6 sites. Same depth range. Same pattern. Durin didn't speak immediately. He didn't need to. The room had already gone still. Because everyone understood what they were looking at. Not a cave. Not a fault line. Something built. Expand the scan, he said. Full structural mapping. The drones adjusted. Sensors widening. Penetrating. Resolving. The image formed slowly. Piece by piece. Until it was clear. Chambers. Massive. Hundreds of meters across. Flat plains. Right angles. Material density inconsistent with surrounding rock. Manufactured. Not geological. Durin stared at the display. Long enough for the data to settle into something that couldn't be dismissed. Then he did something he rarely did. He compared. Not numbers. Not structures. Meaning. Pull historical data, he said. Full archive. The system hesitated. Just for a fraction of a second. Then complied. Public geological record. Displayed. Clean. Simple. Wrong. Durin leaned back. Slowly. The movement deliberate. Measured. Because this was not a mistake. Mistakes didn't look like this. Mistakes weren't consistent across multiple sites. Mistakes didn't align this cleanly. This was altered, someone said quietly. Durin didn't respond. Not because he disagreed. Because it wasn't the important part. The alteration was obvious. The question was, why? He looked at the chambers again. At their scale. Their structure. Their placement. 11 kilometers below the surface. Buried. Hidden. Deliberately. Then something else clicked. Not in the data. In the timeline. Bring up classification history, he said. Virex 9. The system complied. Public record. Class 15. Outer boundary. Uninhabitable. Earlier, Durin said. Oldest available. The system searched deeper. Archives. Buried beneath standard access layers. Then, it appeared. 800 years ago. Class 3. The room didn't react. Not immediately. Because the implication took a moment to fully form. Run environmental comparison, Durin said. Then versus now. The system layered the data. Atmosphere. Temperature. Biosphere. Difference. Total. 800 years wasn't long enough for a natural shift of that magnitude. Not without a catalyst. Not without intervention. Durin stood. Walked closer to the display. Close enough to see the structural detail. The clean lines. The precision. The design. These aren't ruins, he said. More to himself than the room. Not in the way we think. Because ruins decay. Collapse. Break down. These were intact. Sealed. Preserved. Buried under layers that had formed after they were placed there. They were living here, someone said. Durin didn't correct them. Because they weren't wrong. Just incomplete. They were living here, he repeated. Until they weren't. The room stayed quiet. Because no one needed to ask what that meant. Durin returned to the console. Pulled up the colony's internal network. A separate channel. One that bypassed standard reporting systems. one that had been established early. Quietly, a name appeared on the screen. Ilara Ven. He hadn't used the channel in 8 months. Because nothing had required it. Nothing. Like this. He began compiling the data. Every scan. Every comparison. Every discrepancy between what was recorded and what was real. Methodical. Precise. No gaps. No assumptions. Just evidence. Because evidence was the only thing that mattered now. When the package was complete, he paused. Not hesitating. Considering. Then he sent it. Across systems. Through layers. Through a network that wasn't supposed to exist. On the other end, Ilara received it at 3:14. She was awake. She had been for 2 hours. Because something had been building. She didn't know what. Now she did. She opened the file. Read it. Once. Then again. Then she pulled up another set of data. Not from Virex 9. From 6 other worlds. Files she had collected. Over time. Quietly. Carefully. She placed them side by side. Different planets. Different systems. Different histories. Same pattern. Deep structures. Buried. Manufactured. Hidden beneath worlds classified as uninhabitable. 17 total. When she finished counting. 17 worlds. 17 civilizations. Not gone. Not extinct. Removed. The pattern wasn't random. It wasn't isolated. It was systematic. A process. Repeated. Refined. She traced the timelines. Each world. Each classification shift. Each resource corridor integrated into assembly control. Shortly after. Cause. Effect. Not stated. Not documented. But undeniable. Ilara sat back. The room around her unchanged. Calm. Controlled. Artificial. Her understanding was not. This wasn't about Virex 9. Not alone. This was about a system. One that had been operating for centuries. Quietly. Efficiently. Removing problems. Before they became threats. She opened a new document. Blank. And began to write. No accusations. No emotion. No language that could be dismissed as interpretation. Just data. Structured. Layered. Connected. 17 worlds. 17 timelines. 17 disappearances that were not disappearances at all. When she finished. The document was 63 pages long. She read it once. Not for content. For clarity. Then she prepared it. For transmission. Not to one place. To all of them. Every independent network. Every system outside assembly control. Every species that had ever been told. Something had simply ended. She attached the evidence. The coordinates. The timelines. And one final addition. The name of the civilization that had once lived on Virex 9. Recovered from the oldest survey data. The Kith. Names mattered. They always had. She sealed the file. And sent it. Not quietly. Not hidden. Everywhere. At the speed of light. Across the galaxy. What had been buried. Was no longer buried. What had been hidden. Was now visible. And what had been controlled. Was about to become something else. Something the assembly had never successfully contained. The truth. The fleet launched without announcement. 14 vessels. Quarantine class. Standard configuration. Standard authority. Standard procedure. On record. It was a medical intervention. An anomalous development. A precautionary measure. In reality. It was containment. Commander Dreven stood on the bridge of the lead ship as Virex 9 appeared on the forward display. Brown. Grey. Layered with storm systems that never settled. He had reviewed the briefing. Every detail. Every projection. He knew what a 3-year colony on a Class 15 world was supposed to look like. Struggling. Fragmented. Diminishing. What he was seeing was not that. Thermal scan, he said. The data appeared. expanded, broadened, then recalculated. Run it again, he added. The system complied. Same result. The colony footprint was 3 times larger than expected. Confirm last observation report, Drev said. 6 weeks old, his officer replied. In 6 weeks. They didn't finish the sentence. They didn't need to. The expansion was obvious. Measured. Structured. Power output. Above projected capacity. Which meant they weren't just surviving. They were building. Drev moved closer to the display. Ground feed. The orbital cameras shifted. Zoomed. Focused. The image stabilized. At the perimeter, the field markers stood in a wide arc. Beyond them, megafauna. Stationary. Watching. Between them, humans. 5 figures in environmental suits. Standing. Still. No barriers active. No defensive response. Why aren't they moving? One officer asked. Drev didn't answer. Because the answer wasn't tactical. It was something else. They're not being threatened, he said finally. The implication hung in the air. Uncomfortable. Unfamiliar. Open a channel, he ordered. The first transmission received no response. The second. Connected. Durin Hale appeared on the screen. Work clothes. Dust across his shoulders. A cup of coffee in one hand. Commander, he said. No rank. No deference. Just acknowledgement. Colony Administrator Hale, Drev replied. I am here under Assembly authority to initiate quarantine protocol. I know why you're here, Durin said. The interruption landed clean. Not aggressive. Not defensive. Just accurate. Drev paused. Only briefly. Then you understand the situation, he said. Durin nodded once. I understand more than you were told, he replied. Silence. Not empty. Waited. You've seen the data, Durin continued. Or you will. Drev didn't respond. Because he had. Not officially. Not through command channels. But the document had reached him. Like it had reached others. 17 worlds. 17 patterns. 17 absences that weren't absences at all. I'm not going to threaten you, Durin said. I don't have the means. A small pause. Then. I have engineers. Doctors. Farmers. A musician who still plays every night even though the acoustics are terrible. A flicker, barely noticeable, crossed one of the officer's expressions. What I have, Durin continued, is a colony that was supposed to fail. He took a sip of his coffee. And didn't. Drev held his gaze. We were sent here to disappear, Durin said. That didn't happen either. The words settled. Heavy. Unavoidable. Commander, Durin added, you should talk to your captains. The channel closed. No escalation. No demand. Just a suggestion. Drev stood still for a moment. Then turned. Bring all captains online. The call took time. Not long. But long enough. 12 faces appeared. Different species. Different histories. Same position. Drev didn't speak immediately. He didn't need to. Because they had all seen it. One way or another. You've read the document, he said. Not a question. Silence. Then. One captain nodded. Another. Then more. I won't enforce the quarantine, Commander Velo said. Direct. Unhesitating. Drev looked at her. Clarify. It's illegal, she said. A pause. Then. No, she corrected. It was legal. That distinction mattered. It isn't now, she finished. Drev said nothing. Another captain spoke. My home system is in that document. Another. My people were told it was a natural collapse. Another. We buried names that shouldn't have been buried. The call shifted. Not into argument. Into recognition. Drev listened. Not as a commander. As someone recalculating. 7 of 12, his officer said quietly. Would not comply. The others did not object. That was enough. The order came through at 2 p.m. Direct. Clear. Enforce quarantine. Drev read it. Once. Then again. He looked at the emblem on the console. The assembly mark. Clean. Precise. Unquestioned. Then he looked at the data. And the distance between the two. Closed. He stepped onto the bridge. The crew turned toward him. Waiting. The order has been received, he said. A pause. I'm not executing it. Silence. Not shock. Not confusion. Recognition. Any objections will be recorded, he added. None were made. The order remained on the console. Unanswered. Drev opened a new channel. Administrator Hale, he said. Durin appeared again. The quarantine will not be enforced, Drev continued. I am requesting a communication channel outside Assembly Authority. A pause. Then. Durin nodded. Noted, he said. This time. The word carried something else. Something closer to agreement. What followed was not war. The assembly did not collapse in a single moment. Systems like that never did. They unraveled. Slowly. Publicly. Inevitably. The document spread. Across networks. Across species. Across systems that had never been meant to connect. Evidence accumulated. Voices aligned. Histories. Rewritten. There were hearings. Investigations. Reclassifications. Delegates removed. Structures questioned. Foundations examined. Not quickly. Not cleanly. But thoroughly. Because once the truth existed, it didn't disappear again. Kael'thur testified. Calm. Precise. He did not deny. He explained. Which, in some ways, was worse. The system had worked. As designed. That was the problem. On Virex 9. Life continued. Not as survival. As existence. The domes expanded. 6 became 12. Then 19. Connected. Layered. Stable. The perimeter widened. Not defensive. Defined. The megafauna adapted. Or revealed they already had. They no longer tested the barriers. They moved around them. Consistently. Deliberately. Felix updated his notes. Again. And again. Not avoidance, he wrote. Recognition. Lyra grew. She stopped carrying the inhaler. Because she didn't need it anymore. Dr. Nwosu stopped recording asthma cases. Because they stopped appearing. Amora. Walked. Ran. Laughed. And breathed. Unfiltered. Year 11. The classification changed. Not quietly. Not buried. Public. Recorded. Acknowledged. Virex 9. Class 1. Not because the planet changed. Because understanding did. And because the people on it had rewritten what survival meant. Ilara Ven arrived 2 years into the transition. She stepped through the airlock. Removed her helmet. Took a breath. Filtered. Still. Durin met her there. Handed her a cup of coffee. She took it. Drank. Still terrible, she said. Durin nodded. We've worked with worse. She almost smiled. The colony was no longer a colony. It was something else. Not assigned. Not controlled. Chosen. Earned. Amora stood at the edge of the perimeter one morning. Helmet in her hands. The megafauna stood beyond. Watching. She looked at them. They looked at her. No fear. No movement. Just recognition. She lifted the helmet. Disconnected the seals. And breathed. The air moved through her lungs. Clean. Natural. As if it had always belonged there. Behind her. The colony moved. Voices. Work. Life. Ahead of her. The planet stretched. Unchanged. But no longer something to survive. Something to belong to. She placed the helmet back on. Turned. Walked toward the domes. Toward the sound of 50,000 people. Living. On a world that had been meant to end them. and had instead become their beginning.